Howdy, folks. Mr. Reardon here. I'd like to walk you through the first of several related concepts that you will need to know in order to be successful when writing argument essays, both the kind required by the AP English Language and Composition exam, but also those that you might have to write across academic contexts in your classes now or in the future. So, a little bit of context for where we are in AP Lang right now and where we're going. So, either last week or earlier this week, depending on when you're watching this, I had you explore all the released AP Lang argument prompts. And you had a chance to get a really good sense of the kinds of prompts you might come across, the topics or topic categories that these prompts might ask you to be considering, and the kinds of sources they might ask you to be drawing from when you're writing your arguments. And so now I think you're ready for the basics of argumentation. It's my plan to walk you through all those basics. We're going to or It's important for you to understand that a lot of this is going to be review. You will have already learned some of this, but you may not have learned it all in this particular way or in this particular order. And so for some of you, it might be easy. It might be not very much new stuff, but just a slightly different way of looking at it. For others of you, it might be completely new, and that's also totally fine. So we're going to go through the two fundamental essay pieces that you need to know over the next couple weeks. Those are introductions and body paragraphs. Within that, you're going to learn all about hooks and thesis statements and bringing in the exigence of your argument and topic sentences, bringing in evidence, introducing evidence, discussing evidence in different ways. And also, there will be a little bit of work on the argument conclusion, though not nearly as much as for the other two components. Once you have those basics down, we will then start adding layers of complexity. And also, at least this year, this is being recorded in spring 2021, so we're in distance learning. I'm going to be giving you, sort of slowly releasing to you, more and more of the responsibility and the control over how you practice all of the skills that we learn and start adding in those layers of complexity I mentioned. So it's important you understand as well that it's my intention that the things we talk about in the argument unit will help you on the argument and synthesis essays on the AP Lang exam, but they're also going to set you up for the kind of basic argumentative research writing and academic writing you'll be doing in pretty much any class or any non-STEM class in high school and, more importantly, in college. These are like the fundamental building blocks of the kinds of writing you'll be asked to do at higher levels across the non-STEM disciplines. And honestly, even people who are interested in STEM, you're going to need to know some of this stuff and use it in some capacity. So it's really, these are like the most fundamental academic skills you can learn. So keep that in mind. So today we're going to be talking about the argument essay introduction. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to get any AP style argument prompt, whether released by the AP exam or written by somebody else, and you should be able to write a quick introduction paragraph to set you up for the writing of the rest of the essay in response to that prompt. So the most basic structure for the argument introduction paragraph is this: a hook of some kind, followed by the exigence of your argument and or the context of your argument. Context here meaning like the information or any extra information needed in order for a general reader to understand your argument if the content is particularly specific, if it's like a niche topic. And then, most importantly, your thesis statement. So we're going to go through all these pieces in this presentation. You'll have a chance to look at some examples, and then you will be asked to practice. So the hook. The purpose of a hook is to interest the reader, right? Or at least this is the purpose with respect to the person who will be reading or consuming your argument. So when I say interest the reader, I mean interest not only as I use it there as a verb, like pique their interest, make them interested, but also indicate to them what their interest is. In that phrase, there is a determiner and interest is a noun, right? So what is their interest in your argument? Why do they care about their argument, or what does it mean to them? Right? So think about like what is the interest of a general reader to what it is you have to say? What are you adding to enrich their lives in your argument? So there are lots of hooks. We're going to look at just 5 of them. I should also mention here that you can think about hooks from the writer's perspective as well. I know, as someone who's written a whole heckin' lot of papers, that the hardest um, line to write in a paper is often the first one, right? You're just like, what do I start with? How do I start this? I know how to structure a paper, but where do I start? Where do I begin the introduction? This can take away any ambiguity or any uncertainty in that question. If you learn these kinds of hooks, you can just start with one of them every time. So the first kind of hook we should look at is a quote hook. When you're using a quote hook, you will simply smoothly integrate a quote from somewhere, whether from the prompt you're being given or some quote you have memorized, or if it's not on the AP exam, you can take the quote from some other source, as long as it's a quote. It's a juicy quote that, or it's a juicy quote that could be stating the author's claim as long as you don't plan to use it elsewhere. Could also be juicy as in like it just is really provocative, it's interesting, maybe it's got some parallel structure, it says something really profound about the topic that you're considering. It's you get to choose like what kind of really good quote do you want to use for this argument. The quote might naturally flow into Y tag. That is the Y tag of any text that is mentioned in the argument prompt. As you may have seen, some prompts bring in one or even 2 texts written by other folks, written by people, and other prompts don't bring in any text, but are just sort of general prompts. So you will, or if you are using a quote hook and there is a text being referenced, then you could let that introduction quote, kind of like you do for rhetorical analysis, flow naturally into the year, title, author, and genre of the text referenced. So this quote also might naturally incorporate the exigence or context of your argument. So if there's some language in the prompt that simultaneously makes for a great quote hook and also sort of indicates to your reader why you're making this argument or what the origin of your argument is, then they can be the same thing. And we'll talk about that when we get to exigence in this presentation as well. The key idea here is that you are starting with a quote, whether the first words of your paragraph, as I suggested you did in rhetorical analysis, or just like early in that first sentence. Starting with a quote is a great option for a hook. Second option is an anecdote hook. In an anecdote hook, you are telling a brief story that naturally leads into your position on the topic. Stories are, remember that a story is not just like, oh yeah, this happened, right? It has components and you need to, even in a very brief way, you need to make sure that you bring in the important components of a story. You've got characters, who is involved. You've got plot. The most basic plot structure is A happened and B was the result, though you can also do beginning, middle, end, or BME, right? At the beginning, this happened, then this happened, and here was the result. And then of course, there's description. That means the rhetorical mode of description. Be vivid with your details. What senses were being evoked when these characters were going through the events of this plot? So tell a story. Doesn't have to be long. You can do all 3 of those things in just a few sentences, but it should be a compelling story that has all the components of a story. In longer works of nonfiction, as many of you might something less than positively remember from your independent reading project for your first book, I asked you to pay a lot of attention to really specific details in your longer work of nonfiction. And the anecdote hook is definitely one of them. So rhetorical mode of narrative being implemented in order to introduce an argument. This works super well on the AP exam as long as you don't overdo it. You shouldn't be spending 20 minutes just on the introduction story, because then you might not get to the juicy bits of your argument that the AP readers are looking for. So keep it short, but it works well. It really draws your reader in, and it might even get you that sophistication point if you do a good job of bringing the reader in and then connecting your story to the argument topic. The anecdote hook is not always appropriate for highly academic writing, like scientific papers, right? You're probably not going to find this. Another one we're going to talk about soon, the general statement hook, is often much more common and socially appropriate for highly academic writing. But for less, scientific, less formal writing, the anecdote hook is much more common. All right, I have this great example of an anecdote hook that I am going to let you listen to here. So a little bit of context. There is a podcast out there that's called This American Life. It is very, very well known. It's been around for a long time, at least 10 years. In a few years ago, a This American Life journalist named David Rakoff passed away, and the staff of This American Life, of course, they were bereft. They loved his work. And so they released this long episode of their podcast in memory of him. And in so doing, they sort of brought together a lot of stories that he told on the podcast and also outside the podcast about his life over the years. And of course, as a Jewish boy who grew up in Canada and then who moved to the United States, he had some interesting things to say about, this sort of triangular identity, Jewish, Canadian, and American. So I'm going to play this episode for you. It's not super long, maybe up to 10 minutes, but it's totally worth it. You should not skip it. And I think this is a great example of a story of an anecdote hook, because this little story is ultimately the introduction to a much, much longer argument about the impact that a single journalist can have on an entire culture of journalism. And also there's a separate argument that's like, simply, David Rakoff was really impactful in the world of journalism and in the world in general. His work was valuable, and we should be sad, but we should also remember that that he made such a valuable contribution. So I will pull this up here.
Rather than making you never want to eat a chicken again, it simply makes you angry. It makes you hold a grudge.
Oh, excuse me. I'm going to go back here to the beginning because that is not playing at the very beginning.
There are other bits of his childhood that David wrote about over the years. In 1998 on our program, he talked about this incident from high school that was a big turning point for him. At the time, he was part of a Zionist socialist group in Toronto, very idealistic about Israel. They would meet every week, and at 15, go live on a collective farm, a kibbutz, in Israel for the summer.
There we would meet other members of the movement from all over the world and spend many a happy hour engaged in honest labor. Sing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young songs, and, if one's older siblings were any indication, lose our virginity.
From the start, David did not do well working in the fields. He suffered heat stroke. And then one day came, David recalled, the boys were informed that they would be doing a special work detail that night that was going to begin at midnight, and that no girls would be accompanying him. It was going to be men's work, men only. So after 11, they gathered, and they were driven to the farm's chicken house.
The chicken coop of the kibbutz was a one-storied structure of corrugated iron, about half the size of a football field. It emitted a low rumbling, a vague buzz that you could hear from far away. And of course, from even farther away, there was the smell. Chicken is an olfactory insult, a snarling, saw-toothed, ammoniac, cheesy smell, needlessly, gratuitously disgusting. Rather than making you never want to eat a chicken again, it simply makes you angry. It makes you hold a grudge. You'll eat chicken again, by God, and you'll chew really, really hard. One of the barrel-chested Israelis shows us what to do. Pick up 4 chickens in each hand. This is done by grabbing hold of the birds by one leg. If the leg snaps, he says, it doesn't matter just to get 4 in each hand. Beseder, he says. Okay. He faces us holding the requisite 8, 4 in each hand, living masses of writhing feathers. He looks like some German expressionist cheerleader, his pom-poms alive, convulsing, filthy. Who will see their dreams fall away into the abyss and eventually succumb to the crushing sadness and meaninglessness of it all? We will. And what does that spell? Madness! Louder! I can't hear you! He crams the chickens roughly into a blue plastic crate smeared with wet guano. And you close the lid and chick-chack, he tells us, clapping his hands with that's that finality. Before I even try, I know that I will not be able to do this. It is midnight, and we will be here until dawn or until the truck is piled to capacity with crated birds. I walk out into the sea of chickens. I reach down and grab one, its leg a slightly thicker, segmented chopstick. I recoil and stand up. I take a fetid breath, regroup and bend down with new resolve, grab the chicken by its body with both hands, thinking somehow that might be preferable, although how I think I'm going to get 8 of them this way, I'm not sure. Its ribs expand and contract under my fingers, a dirty, warm, live umbrella. I drop the bird as if it were boiling hot. I leave the coop and go out to the trucks. Hoisting myself up onto the flatbed, I start to help with the stacking of the full crates. I know that my unilateral decision to change my task is met with displeasure on the part of the men who run the coop, but I do not care. Their muttered comments are predicated on a direct poultry-penile relationship. I might as well have spurned the stag party whore or gone to the wood shop and fashioned myself a sign that said, fag. Maito, what's the matter with him? The head of the work detail asks when he sees me on the truck. Hagiveret lo hevet atarnegolot, he has answered, using the female pronoun when referring to me. The lady doesn't like the chickens. It would be years before I was referred to as she again, and then, very rarely and only as a joke by friends. I turn around to look at the men, making it quite clear to them that I understand what they're saying. The man who called me she avoids my eyes and busies himself with straightening a pile of crates and tightening the tarpaulin on the side of the truck. You're right, I tell him in Hebrew. She doesn't like the chickens.
Alrighty, so I think that was a good little example for you there. Yes, this is also a great example of the rhetorical mode of narrative. So if you want to think about the anecdote hook as using the rhetorical mode of narrative in order to start your argument, that is totally a valid way of thinking about it. Just know, you probably saw in the upper corner there, if you were looking at the website I had screen shared, that the piece being shared here is much, much longer, and it sort of goes on to make the arguments that I mentioned a few minutes ago, both explicit and implied, about the value of the work of David Rakoff to This American Life, to journalism, and to the world. By the way, I highly recommend that podcast if you are still looking for podcast hours. You could definitely rack them up pretty quickly listening to those really awesome episodes. All right, so our third form of hook is a general statement hook. The general statement hook requires that you make a broad general statement of verifiable fact to start your paper. Not a claim of fact, but rather a verifiable fact. So this only works for some topics. It doesn't work for other topics. So you could say something like, for centuries, humans have blank. Or research has shown time and again that regardless of culture, people blank. Yes, I know I have to water the plants. From 15th century European clothiers to the 21st century designers populating the fashion district's windows, Western culture has done blank and blank with respect to design, right? That would be, that one's sort of sitting on that border between fact and claim of fact, but there's a way you could finish it there, I think, to make sure it's a fact and not a claim of fact. This is much more common in more academic writing, and some people just find this easier than bringing in a quote or telling a story. All right. The fourth option is the definition hook. When you're doing a definition hook, you are essentially starting by using the rhetorical mode of definition. So you are providing the definitions of one or more terms that will be central to your argument or that are somehow relevant to the topic under consideration. These hooks are particularly engaging for readers when there exists some kind of disagreement among people, among maybe experts in the field you're writing about or you're writing in, about what a word or phrase actually means or what things it can mean. You get to clarify your definition, or you get to present the conflicting definitions before you jump into the specifics of your argument. The fifth hook is not really a hook, but I have it labeled here as number 5. It's no hook at all. There are some cases where you can just start with Y tag and the exigence of your argument, and if there's any text mentioned, of course, you can use Y tag. If there's no text mentioned in the argument prompt, you can't do that because there isn't a text that has Y tag, But if you're in a big hurry when you're writing your argument essay and you can't think of any other strong hook, or you don't feel like you have time, you can just jump in and say something like, bring in the general exigence of your argument. In this year, this thing happened. Here's what I think about it. Or this is a situation that needs to be considered. Here's what I think about it. Right. So if you can't do any of the others, you can go for this one. For your practice assignments, I will ask you to not do this, at least temporarily. This is really a on a timed essay. If you need to try this, you can. Or if you need to do this, you can. Otherwise, use one of the other 4 options. Okay, so that was hook. We're now going to talk about exigence. So remember, this is review from our coverage of rhetorical situation first semester. Exigence is the exigence of a text is the conditions, event, or situation that leads a person to write something which is distinct from purpose. So you could think about think about a machine, a widget. This widget takes inputs and outputs, right? The widget is the text. The exigence is the situation that goes in, and the purpose is the thing that comes out on the other side, right? So exigence is the situation that exists before the argument, and the purpose is the objective of the argument that is hopefully achieved by its end on the other side. So on the AP exam, the exigence for your argument is, of course, the multifaceted issue with which you are presented in the prompt. Now, this is not always true, especially if you're writing an argument that is outside the confines of an AP style essay prompt. But generally, that is your exigence. It's what's given to you in the prompt, and so you can harness that when you are building your introduction. You are highly encouraged to rope in some language from the prompt. It's important, though, that you don't pull language from something, or excuse me, it's important that you don't repeat yourself. So if you already used a quote in your quote hook, or language from the prompt in your quote hook, definitely don't repeat it. Don't get anywhere near repeating it in your exigence. You can use language from the prompt in your exigence if you used a different kind of hook, like you used an anecdote hook, and then you're trying to tie the anecdote to the prompt. Well, bring in some language from the prompt in your exigence piece. That would be an effective approach. So again, language from the prompt can be your quote hook. So there are cases, I'll actually show you one on a later slide, where the exigence, your exigence and your hook can be the same thing, essentially. You're using the exigence with language from the prompt. Because the prompt is telling you what the issue is, you're like pulling that language, the exigence language, directly from the prompt, using it to start your argument. So the exigence and hook are the same thing. I don't recommend that if you can avoid it, honestly, but there are some cases where it makes sense and you can do it and it will work. If you're citing something, please make sure that you are including all the elements of YTAG to which you have access. If they're in the prompt, include them. If you're writing an argument about, some topic that was written about in another text that's not an AP prompt, make sure that you're citing that text as sort of the origin or exigence of your argument. This person said this thing in this book in this year, and here's what I think about it, or here's what I want to say about it. So example, in his 1963 speech, I Have a Dream, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writes that some statement, and then you are going to respond to that statement. You're going to talk back to it. What's it? Oh, you're going to clap back to whatever he said. So continuing with exigence here, in longer papers, in research papers, so the kinds of papers you might write in college, you have to be able to figure out what is your motivating move. Why are you writing this thing? You're likely to cite one or more sources that said a thing that you are now entering the conversation about. And so I'm going to show you what these motivating moves look like on this funny thing. This motivating moves sheet came from one of my professors. Credit goes to Professor Margaret Waller at Pomona College for giving me access to this, who I believe got it herself from the Yale University Writing Center. So you can see what motivating moves look like here. They are, so maybe you're making some kind of argument about what the truth of something is. So the truth isn't what one would expect or what it might appear to be on first reading. Maybe the knowledge on this particular topic has been limited. People just haven't written enough about it. So now I'm going to say some things about it that no one's ever said before. Maybe person A said X in one paper and person B said Y in another paper. There's an inconsistency or mystery or puzzle or question that needs unraveling. There's an issue that needs to be addressed. So that covers 3 and 4 there. Maybe there's some larger phenomenon we can learn more about by studying a smaller one. So we're looking at this little thing that happened and it contributes to a grand unifying theory. Yes, Mr. Gladwell, I know that I'm citing you right now. And so you get to make an argument through doing that. Maybe there's some seemingly tangential or insignificant matter that's actually important or interesting. Maybe there's, again, some kind of inconsistency, contradiction, tension that needs explaining. Or maybe most people think X and Y, but actually W and Z are correct. And here I'm going to argue why. So these are all these are the basic sort of underlying formulas for the motivating moves. So there are some examples here from different disciplines, which you can pause the video and read if you would like to. But I am going to move us right along here because this lecture is getting long. So context is as I mentioned earlier, is some extra information that you need to make it clear to a general reader exactly what it is you're arguing about. Maybe you need to give some details, some historical background, some maybe scientific information if you're making an argument about something science related. You just have to sort of give a little bit of extra information in order to make your argument accessible by a general educated public. So it answers this question, right? Is there any other information, such as essential definitions, historical background, that readers must have in order to even understand or access your thesis statement or your argument? Don't be confused with quote context in rhetorical analysis, where that's like location in text plus he says quote, right? That structure is a totally different thing. That's body paragraph context when introducing a quote. Don't forget, right? Just like the hook, this entire section of your introduction should be smooth. It should flow gracefully. There should be no speed bumps syntactically or semantically in your pieces. So now we're going to get to the thesis statement, most important part of your introduction. If you had only 1 minute to write an introduction, just skip everything else and write a clear thesis statement. So your thesis statements can be closed or open. Now, what the heck does that mean? You're in a closed thesis, you are providing in your thesis statement some indication of the points you will cover. And each point will correspond to a body paragraph in your essay. In timed essays, it's generally 2 specific points. And of course, the best essays will include the points in an order that makes sense given the argument. So these closed portions are generally organized around evidence they're generally organized around reasons. But sometimes they can also just be organized around specific evidence that is supporting a given claim. So here's an example. I know that's tiny. Let's see if I can zoom in here. This is still kind of a new computer. I'm not sure if I can do that. Nope, I don't think so. Oh, well. Maybe you can zoom in on your screen. So single-sex classrooms should not be implemented for 3 reasons. Hey, look, we have a main claim. Look at that claim, right? Single-sex classrooms should not be implemented. Beautiful claim of policy. Now there are 3 reasons, and each of these reasons in this closed thesis statement would correspond to 1 body paragraph. First, single-sex classrooms do not provide students with adequate socialization with peers of other sexes. Second, they reinforce a gender binary that systematically excludes students who fall outside that binary. And third, they worsen already alarming trends concerning academic performance of cisgender male students. So 3 separate points. And then an open thesis looks more like this. You are taking a position without including all the points you are going to cover in your body paragraphs, and you just wait to let the body paragraphs do that work. Single-sex classrooms should not be implemented. That would be the end of your thesis. So in general, if I have to write an argument of any kind or a paper of any kind, where a thesis statement of some kind is required, I'm going to use a closed thesis statement. I think they're better. It just makes it so clear for your reader exactly what you plan to argue and the order in which you plan to argue it. So in particular, they're better for short-timed AP essays because by the time you're done with your introduction, it's abundantly clear to you what you're going to argue. And then at that point, you just need to put together all the little paragraph quote sandwiches and make sure that you find evidence to support your claims. So open thesis statements, I think, though, are often better for much longer essays like research papers, where you have a big overarching claim at the beginning of your paper, and you sort of slowly move your reader through this line of reasoning where you bring in a reason in a body paragraph, and then the next body paragraph builds on that, and the next body paragraph builds on that one until you get somewhere really juicy and interesting. That is where an open thesis statement is more effective. So more on the thesis statement. For the AP exam, there are 3 kinds of thesis statements that you might write. Thesis statements that support a claim provided in the argument prompt. Statements that refute the claim. They say the claim is wrong, I disagree, or that qualify a claim. So I agree in some cases, but not in others. And you would have to clarify what were the circumstances in which you agree or disagree. So just quick review of our claims. We saw this first semester. So claims are just arguable statements. Assertions and propositions are rough synonyms. If something can be easily verified, it is definitely not a claim. That is just a fact. So many schools have single-sex classrooms. Yeah, that's a fact, at least in some places. Single-sex classrooms have been around for many years. Yeah, again, a fact, easily verifiable. This one, though, single-sex classrooms are harmful to students and should not be implemented. Harmful is a claim of value, and they should not be implemented, claim of policy. So again, you've already seen this. If you are my students in spring 2021, there are three kinds of claims: fact, value, and policy. And so some quick examples here. Claim of fact, still arguable though, right? Not facts, claim of fact. Zimbabwe has an unstable government. The restaurants on University Avenue are more popular than those on California Avenue in Palo Alto. Claims of value. Dwight D. Eisenhower was the best president of the 20th century, considering goodness or badness. Investing in large companies, even those with questionable practices, might not always be a bad thing. So again, we had that word bad there. So claim of value, considering goodness or badness. And then claim of policy. So people should or should not do something. They suggest some kind of action or change. So suspension and expulsion should be replaced with more effective consequences for inappropriate actions in public schools. Owners of fuel-inefficient cars should have to pay a surcharge in addition to car registration fees. So there are those words like should in those two claims. On the AP exam, you're in your closed thesis statements, you're going to have that main claim like single-sex classrooms should not be implemented. That would be, and then you have subclaims. That is your individual claims of fact, value, or policy. Probably fact and value, honestly, because your overarching claim is a claim of policy typically in these argument essays. Not always, though. But your subclaims are going to be sort of lower on that pyramid, where fact is at the bottom, value is in the middle, and policy is in the top, than your main claim. So if main claim is policy, your subclaims could be value or fact. But if your main claim is a value, then your reasons are going to be claims of fact. It would be weird to have a claim of value as your overarching main claim in an argument, but then have claims of policy as your reasons. That doesn't really make sense. When you're being asked questions, instead of being handed a claim in the argument prompt, that's a little more difficult for you. You're going to have to draft your own claims in the process of developing a thesis. So take that question and tweak it and turn it into a claim. All right, some examples of thesis statements. These are based on the 2006 prompt. So here they are. If you go to the link there, which I will also make sure is in the description, you can see the document that contains these. And by the way, these are in response to the prompt you can see on the top there. It was a 2006 AP Lang argument prompt. There are 6 versions of thesis statements here. So please pause the video, take a minute to just listen or to read through these different thesis statements and pay attention to which ones are open and closed and which ones are supporting, refuting, and qualifying the thesis statement. Or excuse me, the main claim in the argument. All right, so you should have taken a minute to look through these here. You can see in this first row, you have these main claims at the top, right? Expressions of opinions via media sources are not only worthwhile, but essential to modern democracy. So there's this implied claim of value here. They're important, they're valuable, they're good. And then you have the claims of fact to support it. And so again, main claim and then 2 subclaims. And then you have, for the refute here, categorically harmful to modern democracy and should be restricted. This is these are, again, claims of value, and then there are two subclaims. And here, now this one's a little more complex. You have sort of these two claims of value with specific contexts that qualify them. So they are beneficial to democracy in this context, but harmful in this other context. The open versions of these thesis statements, I think, are pretty transparent. It's just the same general claims as you see in this row, but without as many of the without the details that will be covered in the ensuing body paragraphs. I'll say a quick little thing here about the pronoun I. Please don't shy away from using the pronoun I in argument essays if it helps you to be more concise. You should not make the mistake of passing off your own personal experience as evidence in an argument, which we'll talk more about later. That's actually a fallacy, which is a weak argument. Just because this is what you think or this is your experience doesn't mean that's everyone's experience. So, but if you want to say what you plan to argue in your thesis statement by using the pronoun I'm going to argue this and I'm going to do it this way, please do it. It's way clearer than trying to do these jump really high in the air backwards and land on your hands kind of language acrobatics to put things in the past, in the passive construction, and in so doing avoid the first person pronouns. That's just, don't bother doing that. Just be clear, use the first person pronoun I. All right, so a couple examples here. Again, I'm going to ask you to just pause the video, look at the color coding here. These are based on the 2010 prompt on humorists by Alan de Botton. You could pull that up and look at it if you want to. I'll make sure the link is in the video description on YouTube. And then, and yes, the hook is red, exigence is blue, thesis is green. So pause the video, take a look at these. If you want to pull up the others as well, there are 3 more. You can see those there. The link is on the screen. Alrighty, the only thing I want to mention here to make sure you noticed is that this second one here does not have any red bit. And that's because the exigence is functioning as the hook in this second example. I think this second example is not perfect. I feel like the subclaims here are not clear enough, or they're not specific enough. I'd like them to be more specific, but the way the language is put together, as well as the way this writer pulls in or uses exigence as a hook, makes it good enough that I would give it to you as a strong example of what an argument introduction looks like. All right, so you're now going to be asked to practice. Because if you're watching this video as my student in spring 2021, then your practice will be in Schoology. You'll probably know what that is, but this video is going to be publicly available on YouTube probably much longer than just this semester. So if you are not my student in spring 2021, or if you're not even my student at all, then you can just go, or what I recommend you do to practice is to just pull up the released argument prompts. I will make sure those are available, again, in the description of the video. You can pull them up, you can look at them, then try to write 4 of them on your own. Just do it and try to do them like the first one. Don't rush, just get the hang of it. Then for the others, time yourself. 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. By the end, you should be able to write 4 of them. You could do this typed or by hand, your choice. If you can write one of these in 5 minutes right after looking at the prompt, you are absolutely ready to move forward and look at the next pieces of the body paragraph. Alrighty, so that's all I have for you. Thank you, folks.